speech. Thank you so much. And thank you, Andreas, to be here. It's an honor for us to have you here. And we are very, very thankful to you deeply. Thank you so much. La presentazione sarà in inglese per qualsiasi... Abbiamo i nostri esperti di inglese per qualsiasi aiuto. Thank you. Thank you.
Buongiorno e grazie per l'invito. And I want to first also present my congratulations to the INVALSI for this really remarkable achievement. You know, over the last years, you have become the conscience of Italy's education and actually also model for Europe. I think these days many other countries are looking to the INVALSI when they talk about assessment. You know, I've been working with the INVALSI since almost 30 years by now, and I remember the early days hosted in a beautiful place in Frascati where most of the work there was about people debating about assessment. And I they hosted some very good international conferences, usually with people about twice my age. And I would have never thought in those days that, you know, one day the INVALSI will become a world-class institution that's actually delivering assessments to millions of students. And I think it's three things sort of that I find really special. The first, of course, is the methodological rigor with which the assessment is pursued, which gives the work the credibility that you can see here. The second, which I find also is important, the commitment to innovation. The commitment to look in assessment really to the future. What do we need to assess? How can we use the most up-to-date methods? And last but not least, and you've spoken about this as well, is the idea that assessment, the test of truth for assessment is always, will it help students learn better? Will it help teachers teach better? And will it help schools to really become more effective and school systems become effective? And I can feel that commitment in virtually everything that you do and that you say. So my congratulations again. But, you know, we always need to look forward. The world is changing very, very rapidly. And that's something that we can see at the global level as well. Now, we have followed educational progress over the years very closely through, for example, our PISA assessments. In the field of science, we started in 2006, and even that is a long time ago for many of us. Remember, that was a year before the iPhone was invented. We didn't have smartphones that dominate everything we do today. And Twitter was still a sound. The Amazon was still a river. Many of the things that we take for granted today didn't exist in those days. But if you look actually educational progress in the principal industrialized countries, the OECD countries are the wealthiest countries in the world. They have all the money, all the resources. And still, we couldn't see much of progress in the education system. And then you can see sort of 2009, remember that was the year when maps became dynamic. Google Maps, cars became electric, starting to drive without a driver. And still, you know, our education systems kept remaining where they were. And if you look at the time between 2012 and 2015, you know, think about, you know, biogenetics, big data, cloud computing, robotics, huge changes in the world of science and technology around us. And actually, education is starting to go backwards. The demands around us are rising much faster than how education can keep up, and that's the picture in the wealthiest countries in the world. And you can see, basically, you know, Italy is no exception, following exactly that same pattern like most countries in the industrialized world. And there are just a handful of countries that have been able to escape that trend. You can look, for example, Portugal started out, you know, where Italy was and keeps growing. It's an exception. No? Singapore, you know, countries in East Asia moving from good to great. No? And then there are some regions in China, you have to walk to the second floor here to see the results. But these are the exceptions. No? I think the urgency that of educational progress not keeping up with the changes of our time is real. And I think the work of INVALSI to track progress on a very systematic base is truly important. I also believe your work on tracking progress at the individual student level is very important. Your effort to measure value added is, I think, one of the principal assets of the work that you are completing, because it's not about averages, it's about helping every child to succeed. And the answers are not easy. You know, some people say, well, just add more time to schooling or more money, but actually, you know, I'm showing you here the huge differences in the time that young people spend learning. In blue, in school, and in yellow, sort of learning at home. And you can see in the United Arab Emirates, people learn almost 60 hours per week. But then you look to Finland, is only a little bit more than half that time. Huge differences in the time and effort that people spend learning. But when you look at productivity, and that's about outcomes, you can see in countries like Finland, Germany, Switzerland, or Japan, students learn a lot in very little time. And in the United Arab Emirates, they spend a lot of time and learn very little. So it's not just about doing more of the same things. It's really about changing the heart of education, and we only know if we can measure this. It's very hard to improve what we can't see and what we can't measure. We also need to always be conscious that we work in a very kind of socially conservative environment in education. Sometimes, we as parents are part of the problem, not part of the solution. We get very anxious when our children no longer learn things that we felt were so terribly important for us. And we get even more anxious when our children learn things we no longer understand. Teachers are sometimes teaching how they were taught, not how they were taught to teach. And as a politician, you can lose an election over education. You rarely win one over education because it just takes so much time to translate, better ideas into better outcomes. And so it's really, really hard to change things. And assessment, I think this was said here very well this morning, can be part of the problem and can be part of the solution. Assessment can hold us back, can capture us in the past, focused teaching, narrow teaching, but it can also advance our teaching. It can advance our education by showing us new ideas, by pushing teachers to think beyond their comfort zone, by pushing teachers in more disadvantaged regions to think about the future and to think about performance in better relating schools. So I think assessment is an essential part where we need to get it right. So let's talk about some of the kind of changes that we really need to see. Now the past was easy, sort of. We just sorted young people, and education is very good at that. In every country you can find some excellent schools. Now, you could see that also here on the test. Even in the lowest performing regions, you can see some students and schools with great results. But the future is about helping every young person to succeed. In the past, it was about routine cognitive skills, teaching people to memorize something. Today is about complex ways of thinking, complex ways of working. The things that will make people successful will be different in the future. We need to capture them in the future of assessment. I'm going to talk about this in just a moment. In the past, teaching was about helping, young people to do the same things over and over again. And it was very easy to do. We didn't need to have, great knowledge workers in the field. That's very, very different today. And teaching today has become a profession of advanced knowledge workers. And that means, different school systems in which we focus less on moving information upwards. And I think that's also an important lesson for assessment. Assessment is not just about feeding the kind of hierarchy in the administration, but it's about connecting people. Good assessment is about helping teachers to learn from teachers, helping schools to learn from schools, and helping the system to learn from the system. And again, when I look at your results at INVALSI, I really feel that is the spirit in which you work, building information that connects people and helps people to grow. Let's think about the kind of trends that shape education for the future. The first, a good trend is that there are more wealthy people in the world, not more people demanding better educational service everywhere. And you can see this in relative and absolute terms. But the flip side of this is the growing inequality in our countries, in the wealthiest countries. And the 10% top earners are now earning 10 times as much as the 10% bottom earners. Why do I say this today here? Because that ends up on the doorsteps of classrooms, and that ends up on the doorsteps of what we're going to find in the assessments. You could see the large disparities in the outcomes within and across regions. It's not going to get any easier. The world is going to be tougher on schools, demanding to cope with the diversity in an even more way. You can see, more people are on the move. Immigration, international flows of people will make our classrooms more diverse. And again, that's something that's going to end up on the doorsteps of schools, and it's going to face teachers, and it's going to be something that our assessment systems need to become sensitive to. We spend more and save less, something that you know very well in Italy, and that's sort of making our societies, our education systems more volatile. Education has to compete against a larger range of priorities that are about consumption. And I think this is something that we should take to heart as well. And then, of course, the big elephant in the room is technology. You can see the exponential rise of artificial intelligence, pushing us a lot harder to think what makes us truly human. What are those kinds of human qualities that complement, not substitute, the intelligence of computers? The kind of things that are easy to teach, easy to test, are precisely the things that are also easy to digitize, to automate, to outsource. They're disappearing from our labor markets. Now, if you think about digitalization, it's been incredibly democratizing. Everybody can collaborate, everybody can compete. But it's also concentrating power at a rate we've never seen before. It's incredibly particularizing. The smallest voice can be heard anywhere. You post something on Twitter and anybody can follow you. But it's also incredibly homogenizing, squashing individuality, cultural uniqueness. It's again something that ends up on the doorsteps of classrooms. Technology is incredibly empowering. Now, you can see that right here in Rome. The most successful companies these days don't start with a big industry, they start with a big idea. They have the product before they have the money. That's the world in which we live today. But technology can also be incredibly disempowering. When we become the slaves of algorithms, when computer can figure out better who we are and what our ideas are, then we can understand this ourselves. And again, this is reality today, and something that in the world of assessment we need to take on board. Just sort of put some data on this. You can see the skills that are disappearing fastest from our world of work is memorizing something and reproducing that later. Routine cognitive skills. And they're still very dominant in most of our tests because they're very good at testing, whether people memorize something. When you can see the rise in skills, it's about creative thinking, complex ways of problem solving. Those are the kind of tasks we need to become better at representing in our assessments. And look at the green line. Actually, the competencies that are gaining fastest in value are social competencies. Ms. Palumbo has mentioned this already, the rise in social emotional competences in our world. And we're not very good in actually reflecting them yet in our tests. We talk about social competences, but then at the end of the school year, we put students behind individual desks and ask them to be better than the neighbors on the test. Now, that's not the way how we develop social competences. We looked at that for the first time in PISA in 2015 with an assessment of collaborative problem solving, but we need to go much, much further. I think those kinds of tests are very, very important. So what are those skills that we need to look more carefully in the future? Once again, think about what the smartphone has done to people. Knowledge is at our fingertips. The world no longer rewards us just for what we know. Google knows everything. The world rewards us for what we can do with what we know. I find, your approach of focusing on competency in INVALSI, I think, is very, very important these days. The virtual world and the real world have become sort of integrated and everybody got connected. And that's sort of the simple part of it. Has made a lot of things easier. Technology also makes a lot of things more difficult. And when it comes to assessment, for example, in the past, when you think about reading, we talked a lot about assessing reading skills today. In the past, that was easy. Reading was about decoding. You teach people to extract knowledge from something that somebody else has written in a linear way. And when you didn't know the answer to a question, you can send your student to look it up in an encyclopedia, and you can trust the answer to be true. Today, you look up something on Google and you find 500,000 answers to your question, and nobody tells you what is right and what is wrong, what is true and what is not true. Literacy has become about constructing knowledge, not about extracting knowledge. Now our tests need to make that revolution still. Our tests are still largely, reading tests are still largely about, traditional forms of reading. And I think we need to advance this to get to these kind of very complex ways of working. And then, the social skill side, great, we can connect with everyone, but the reality is the people with which people connect with in reality are, people who think like you, who look like you, who are like you. Technology actually has made us connected with similar. It's been much more difficult for young people today to experience diversity in our society. Let's hope that our assessments can reflect those kind of trends in greater depth. Now, we have sort of looked at this at detail in the OECD. Disciplinary knowledge will always remain important, but there is a shift from content knowledge to epistemic understanding. Can you think like a scientist as opposed to just know something in biology, chemistry, and physics? And can you design an experiment? Can you distinguish questions that are scientifically investigable from those that are not? Can you think like an historian? History is often associated in school with names and places and things like that, but actually the real question is, can young people understand how the narrative of a society has emerged, how it has developed, how it advances, and how sometimes it unravels when the context changes? And what does it mean for the world in which we live today? Can you think like a mathematician? Those are the kind of questions that in our assessments need to get greater prominence, because if people do not understand the foundations of a discipline, Google is useless to them. But if people just learn at the surface of the discipline, and we are very good at that, unfortunately, in school, they'll never understand and how to extrapolate from what they know. And then the skill side, cognitive skills are very obvious, creative thinking, critical thinking. That's actually quite well reflected in most of the assessments today. But on the social and emotional sides, we are just at the very beginning. I'm going to show you a couple of data slides on this today. When you think about, key skills today, at the heart of this is agency, the students as an active learner. We've often made students very passive recipients of knowledge, and then we test that knowledge. And in the future, we have to think much more about students being really active co-creators of knowledge in the classroom. And then, on the one hand, the first thing that people talk about is the capacity of people to create value, the innovative capacity. Our assessments, we're trying to do that also in our PISA assessment now, the capacity of students to create responses that we don't predict, that we don't pre-code in our tests. It's going to be one of the biggest challenges of assessment. The capacity of students to sort of step back, see the bigger picture, to manage tensions and dilemmas, to take responsibility. Those things become increasingly important. And when you think about pedagogical implications, openness and awareness, we're very good in teaching young people the established wisdom of our times. That's very easy to do. We're not as good in keeping people's mind open to the novelty, to have them question the established wisdom of our times. Think about a test in the future. You need to become better in those kinds of things. And then again, in this wealth of information which inundates us every day, can we step back? Can we see the bigger picture? Can we see the forest among the trees? These things are really important. All easy to talk about, very, very hard to deliver on. I want to show you a couple of data slides. When people look at top performers on PISA, they often look to Canada. Particularly the state of Ontario is an amazing education system, achieving very strong performance on PISA. And you can see that, on critical thinking, communication, problem solving, the Canadians have a lot of emphasis in their curriculum. But then you go one step further, cooperation, social skills. You barely see any bar on this. Now, I'm not saying that Canadian teachers are not, putting an emphasis on social skills, but there's not a part that is foreseen or, a kind of deliberate part in their instructional system. There are a lot of empty cells, even in the best education systems in the world by today's metrics, which also tells you we need to become better and more comprehensive in our metrics. Let's look at another one, Japan, and again, a system that does really, really well internationally. But you can see the Canadians were doing so well on critical thinking, putting a lot of emphasis on this. That is not a particular strength in Japan. But then you look at social skills. That's where the Canadians didn't do very much. This is a big emphasis in the Japanese curriculum. But you go to the end of the slide here, entrepreneurship, agency, the key sort of to success in tomorrow's world, not present in the curriculum. All what I want to show you today is that even systems that look very good on today's metrics have big weaknesses that they need to watch out for, which also shows us that our metrics, how we measure success, need to become more comprehensive as time goes on. And then, there's always a gap between what people say and what people do. I want to show you an example from the United Kingdom here. You can see that 96% of teachers say, my role as a teacher is to facilitate students' inquiry, and students learn best by finding solutions on their own. Or, thinking and reasoning is more important than curriculum content. You look at this and you think these British teachers are amazing. No? They have understood the requirements of the 21st century, and that's where they're going. But then the question is, do teachers actually do what they say? And how do we find out? By testing students. And actually, when we did that in PISA, we found this. When it comes to the prevalence of memorization, if British teachers would have this very constructivist view on teaching and learning, you wouldn't find much memorization going on in British classrooms. You would find them at the bottom of the list here. But the bottom place is already given to Switzerland, then comes Poland, then comes Germany, and so on. Actually, Britain comes out right on top. It tells you something how important assessment is. Now, we wouldn't know. If we just ask people what they believe, or politicians what they write in the curriculum, we would have one side of the reality, but by actually looking into classroom, we get an understanding of the actual reality. And when you look at the kind of things I've been talking about, deep reasoning, learning, intrinsic motivation, critical thinking, creativity, what you can see, the picture is very different. While teachers aspire to this in the UK, they're not doing as much of this, at least not in terms of the learning strategies demonstrated by students. Had to ask you at the beginning, who comes out on top with rote learning? Which is the country where students are most subjected to drill and rehearsal? Many of you might have tipped on, countries like China. Because we have still this idea from the 1960s and 70s, the drill country. But actually, China just comes out on the middle of the pack. They use some memorization because obviously memorization is one important learning strategy. But they are also very, very good on the 21st century kind of approaches to learning. Why this is a problem? Some people believe your memorization is very effective to learn. And it's good for something, I put that here in green, but it's actually not good for a lot of things. And when I show you here on the example of our PISA assessment, tasks by their order of difficulty, you can see the more complex mathematical tasks become, less memorization helps you, and the more it hinders you to find right answers. It's really interesting. Memorization isn't just at the front, you're neutral. When you expect, to remember the answer, you will never find it if the answer is not rooted in the kind of problem that you see in front of you. And why do I say this? Because the world is moving very rapidly from the left to the right side. The left side is done by computers 1,000, 1,000,000 times faster than humans. The right side is where we humans can make a difference. So again, our assessments, you need to reflect that side with greater accuracy. And you can see the flip side of this, the type of elaboration strategies where we still struggle in education. You can see they become highly predictive for a student's success when the world is becoming more complex. The world is changing rapidly. Our education systems need to keep up with this, and this is about changing instructional practice and so on. When we think about the future of assessment, we also need to become more aware of what children learn best at what age. You can see, for example, brain sensitivity is particularly high when it comes to language in the very early years, but also for social skills, emotional control. Actually, at the age of 3, the window to shape emotional control is already closing. So early childhood education and care have a huge role to play when it comes to aspects like empathy, like emotional resilience, those aspects that are very, very important. Sometimes in life we talk about, personality traits or character quality because we think, they are inborn, they're part of our genes. But actually neuroscience tells us, no, they're actually skills, they're learned, they can be taught, they can be assessed. The OECD, we're at the moment developing an assessment of those kinds of tools because we want to make them visible, because we want to provide guidance and help for educators to develop them better. And you can see actually when you look at mathematics performance, obviously persistence, as you know from your old school days, is very important to do well in mathematics. But mathematics is nothing about mechanical kind of problem solving that we often teach in the school. It has a lot to do with curiosity. It has a lot to do with your own beliefs, self-related beliefs. Those are the social emotional predictors that in our study were very, very important to get good grades in mathematics. The arts. Of course, everybody associates the arts with creativity. But actually, persistence, effort, is almost as important. And that's true for innovation as well. Innovation is only in part about creativity. It's very easy to put new ideas into the world. The harder part is to organize these ideas, to pursue them very systematically. And that's really where persistence comes in. Self-control. To be a good artist, it means to be really diligent, to observe, to listen. And you can see that in the data, those things come out very, very strongly. I just want to make a case why the assessment of social emotional skills should no longer be a byproduct. It should become an integral part of how we look at the future of assessment. Even, the children's health. Social demographics, yes, they are important. Family context and so on. But once again, social emotional skills are one of the best predictors that we have of the health of children. This is, by the way, one of the reasons why students from disadvantaged backgrounds often fall behind. Now, very last part, how do we actually assess? What are the kind of methods that will play a bigger role? First of all, we need to understand very clearly of what we're trying to achieve in education. The debate is also one that is reflected in a way in our assessment strategies. The kind of assessment systems that we have provide a yardstick to this. They tell us what is important. We need to build the evidence base. And again, here I think I congratulate INVALSI. I think you have really in the last decade changed the landscape in Italy, making success visible, tractable, and so on. And then, of course, what can we actually change is the reality of delivery. That is very, very important. Think about those things in a little bit more detail. Of course, we talk about student learning, but student learning has to do with the instructional practices that are being used, the intervention mechanisms, the support systems that exist. And practices always come from people, the teachers, the principal, but don't forget the families, the support personnel, and so on. And people are embedded and influenced by processes. How we prepare them, how we attract them, the kind of work organization environment that school systems provide for people to do their work well. And that ultimately has to do with, tools like the ones we are talking here today. That's really the complexity of the picture that we have. And that means also there are many actors involved. Assessment has to do with the system. What are the attributes of the education system that we need to change and can change? It has to do with the world of the school, and it has to do with the world of the classroom. And I think you could see that really well today. Also, the granularity that the assessments now provide to track, by school and region, I think are very, very important for the future of this. We need to be very conscious of why we're doing this. Is it for accountability, to feed information upwards? Is it for improvement? And sometimes the signals that we send with the assessments are very, very different ones. Who is actually involved in doing this? One of the strengths of your assessment has always been that you have a very close relationship with the schools and the teachers. I think that's a big strength of the INVALSI assessment systems, that it's not, dropped down on the schools, but it's a very participatory process. And I think the high kind of response rate that you had are very, very impressive. The question of, with whom is this going on? What's the involvement of society? And then obviously, what are the methods that are being deployed? It is a complex picture, and it's complex everywhere. But I think in your case, you have mirrored that complexity well in the design of the instruments. I want to talk also a little bit about some of the really difficult choices that are involved. You test 5 million students in Italy. Efficiency is very, very important to make this affordable, to make this manageable. But we must not trade in efficiency gains for validity gains. There's always a balance to be struck. Now, tasks, to be good, to be valid, need to be complex. They need to engage students. They need to be interactive. So there's a balance to be made. There's a balance to be made between relevance and reliability. In an assessment agency like INVALSI, you get in trouble when there are questions about reliability. That's why there is so much emphasis being put to make sure that the test is trustworthy, it's reliability. And I think it's done really well in this. But we must not lose the focus on relevance. If I want to design the most reliable test in the world, I ask you 20 times the same question and I get a very reliable answer. But that's not a very meaningful kind of test. Sort of to keep that balance is very important. Keeping a good balance between individual and social competencies. Today, all of our assessments are very much geared towards assessing the competency of individuals. I do think we need to think harder about the social side of this. Looking at outcomes and process data. Actually, one of the biggest gains from moving to a computer-based assessment that INVALSI has seen is not just about making this, delivering a better set of tasks and allowing sort of for more complex measurement. In the future, you can actually observe not only whether students get the answer right, but you can actually understand how students get to the answers. And this kind of process data may be more valuable for helping teachers to teach better than just knowing whether the students figured out the answer. So I think there's a huge promise in here, but it's a very complex story. And again, balancing standardized testing conditions and authentic tasks. Today, the worst crime you can make in a test is to, look at your neighbor, copy results from your neighbor. But we're just talking about social skills. So maybe in the future we should actually encourage students to be very social and just produce their originality in the response. Or, another crime you can make is, to put out your smartphone and to look up an answer from the test. But maybe that also tells us we should design maybe different tests where actually students will be welcomed to have access to the internet and to their smartphone on anything they want. And we will not focus on that knowledge, but focus on the thinking skills for students to actually deploy that knowledge. So again, I think these are very, very important challenges and tasks that we need to think about it in the future and do that. Let me just conclude with a couple of technological innovations that we see today. First of all, virtual reality. There are actually today amazing assessments, not so much in school because again it's an efficiency issue, but we do see in the field of medicine and health some very interesting assessments that use virtual reality, so have students actually trying out things. In the area of vocational education, students have to repair something and you can actually test to what extent they are really, really good at that. That is a field I think that will help us make learning, make assessment more authentic. The assessment management part. And as you could see with the INVALSI test, it is now possible to test millions of students in a very short time and have the results ready actually at an impressive speed. This is another thing I congratulate to. Now you have actually been able to do this in a very, very quick way. But also there the future holds a lot more in helping teachers get this information very quickly, schools get this information to sort of build that connection between the users and producers of information. Adaptive assessments. I don't like this word standardized tests. Now, everybody gets the same test. Now, everybody learns differently. In the future, our assessments probably need to become more adaptive to the individual differences of students. We're doing that already in part of the assessments now, where we basically start with an average task. If you get it right, you're going to get a harder task until you reach your limit. If you get the first tasks not right, then the assessment gives you sort of something that's a little bit easier and so on. So there are already models doing this, but I do believe we need to get much, much further in this field to make our assessments responsive to the different learning styles and ideas of students, that tests are no longer standardized but individualized and produce still comparable results. I think that's another challenge for the future. Smart grading. How can assessments actually grade complex student responses? The future of assessment is probably more open-ended, more constructed, less multiple choice, less prefabricated answers. But it makes grading a lot more complex, and artificial intelligence will no doubt play a very, very important role, and we do see emerging examples for this. And then also the issue of the formative analytics. No? How can we connect learners and educators? Today, we talk about formative and summative assessments as two different worlds. And some people say, well, the assessment steals time from the learning, takes something away from the learning process. The future probably needs to see both in a more integrated way, where assessment becomes really part of the learning process for the student and the teacher. And with that, I want to conclude my presentation. Last November, I visited this class in the province of Shanghai in China. And it was a primary school where the students were taught calligraphy. This is a big headache for the system there. You have to teach your students 26 characters, and they have to teach them 4,000 characters. No? So that takes a lot of time and effort in school. No? So what did they do? They asked the students, to do their drawing on their table, but under each table they had a scanner. And the scanner was recording the students' drawing. And then next to them, the students had a tablet. And the tablet was actually giving them real-time feedback on the accuracy of their drawings. So the student was, while they were drawing, they were getting actually feedback from the teacher. Not 3 weeks later from the teacher or a day later, but actually they were getting real-time feedback on their quality of their drawings, based on artificial intelligence, big data patterns. And only when the student was happy with the result, they clicked the green button and sent it to the teacher. So it was a very confidential process of learning. And then when I'm happy, I send it to the teacher who then marks my result. And the most interesting thing started afterwards, actually. The teacher went with me in the next classroom and said, let's have a look at the results. So that they could actually see the pattern of student responses. Now, here was a student who took 4 seconds longer than a student from a similar social demographic background in this school. Now, here are common misconceptions of students in my class. So I must have explained something not so well. So the teacher became the learner from the results in real time. And at the school level, the school could then see sort of where do we are. That's sort of example where the assessment and the learning can become really an integral part, and we get a real kind information system. This is sort of a long-term view on where we might be going. But I do think it's very, very important to be thinking about these questions today. Now, our world is changing at a breathtaking speed. At the moment, I must say, wherever I look, and it's not about Italy, this is about every country in the industrialized world. The gap between what societies demand from education, our economies demand from education, and what school systems provide is not becoming smaller, it's becoming wider. And I sincerely believe that assessment and evaluation has a big role to play to keep education, keep pace with the demands of our society. And once again, I think INVALSI is one of the leading institutions in the world, and I'd say not just in Europe, where it's become a real model in the world to help bring this discourse forward. Thank you very much.
Dear Andreas, thank you very much for your very inspiring presentation. You make it for us possible to just take a look out of the box. I think it's very, very important for us to have this possibility, this